It's like 2 seconds before. So we are joined this hour by Lupe Carrasco Cardona. This is part of the DOS Signature Series speaker series, and we're really, really thrilled. Lupe is a teacher, a artist, an organizer, a curriculum developer, just so many talents, so many different skills that all come together into one just amazing, Lupe Carrasco Cardona. So we are really, really thrilled to have you here for the hour. Lupe,
thank you. Thrilled to be here. Yeah.
Can you speak to a little bit how all these multiple disciplines they play into each other? Like, how does being a teacher affect your artistry? How does being your background in arts affect how you teach? Can you tell us a little about that?
Sure. Well, I mean, let's just kind of let me talk a little bit about some of the things that I do on an official basis. So I'm a teacher, right? I teach high school theater, ethnic studies lens, but also ethnic studies as well. I've been a teacher for 20 years. I'm a mom. I've been a mom for more than half my life. I have a 25-year-old son. I was 18. Yeah, my mom was real happy about that. But I was 18 when I had my first child. And I'm also an organizer with an organization, Unión del Barrio. And I'm also the audit praxis chair for the Association of Raza Educators Los Angeles. And currently working on what we call the Liberated Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum Coalition. That's our new organization that we've just created with members from throughout the state. And so all of these things sort of come together, right? Like my life as a Chicana, being raised in the movement, seeing firsthand, the injustices and being very aware of them because of the people around me that were, really talking about what was going on and what we were going to do to take action against it, right? So just, me growing up and becoming a young mother, if kind of falling into some of the quote unquote stereotypes, despite the fact that I was already conscious, I graduated from continuation high school, almost didn't graduate at all, had a child very young, and then, eventually going to community college and then just saying, hey, I'm pretty good at this. Plus, in college, unlike high school, you can choose your major, you can choose what you're studying, right? And so I was like, I want, Chicano studies, I want, Latin American studies, because these are the people that I need to understand, my own people, and so that I can be a part of creating change, right? And then, becoming a young mother while going to school, then eventually becoming a teacher. And then all the while being sort of like a suppressed artist, right? Like I always loved art. I loved, music. I loved dance. I loved theater. But because of, being raised by a single mother who didn't so much understand that those are valuable things. Those are things that enrich your soul. So I didn't, get an opportunity to develop those things in me. So I had like all this like inside of me, all this pressure, right? Meanwhile, seeing injustices in the world, causing my own injustices in my life, feeling extremely frustrated. And then eventually when I was able to find a positive outlet for that art, it all sort of came together, right? Like I became a young teacher while also raising a family and always coming to the classroom with the frustrations of the outside world, but at the same time wanting to do something about it in a beautiful, creative way. And so that's kind of how they all sort of come together. And, eventually the folks that I now am a member, like a organizer with, members, I'm a member of Unión del Barrio, Association of Raza Educators. They really kind of recruited me because they saw that in me. They saw that I possess all of these things. And so, yeah.
So, you said a number of things there that we could definitely add upon. I'm very, very interested in talking about. But over the course of the interviews, we've talked to a number of people who have talked about, they have all this life experience, and then, they go to college and they first encounter, Chicano studies, and it's like this eye opener. Just can you talk to our audience a little bit about that experience of when you first started getting involved in Chicano studies?
Sure. So in my case, because I was raised by an activist, a Chicano activist, both my parents were migrant farm workers, as were my uncles and aunts, my grandparents, and so on and so forth. So, but my father, his reaction as a migrant farm worker as a young child was, fuck this. Like what they're doing to the people is not right. My grandmother, she made tortillas for, Cesar Chavez and the farm workers. Like literally my family's home had one of Cesar Chavez's benches on it because they welcomed, the strikers and whatnot. So my dad became very conscious very young. So I understood or was a part of like Chicano studies before college, right? So it's really interesting what happened to me though. So I was being raised by Chicano activists who told me, you are not going to be a wasichu. You will not sell out. You're going to be down for your people. And so in my head, I had like all this pressure and like I was passionate too, right? And so all these negative things that were happening in schools, I grew up in like Oxnard, California, right? And what I saw over there was that the students who were being tracked to be college bound were not the people who look like me or like my cousins, like my mom, like my family members, right? And so what happened for me is I ended up falling into that sort of like negative stereotype where I resisted being in the college track. I resisted the AP. I resisted all of that because when I was in those classes, the teachers and the students were not about, fighting against oppression. They were about like a piece of the pie. We want a piece of the pie, right? And I'm like, F this pie. Like we need a whole new pie, right? Because this pie don't work. This is not an equitable pie. Like this, we don't even want a pie. We want a whole something else, right? It's just like air to breathe. And so I actually sought out Chicano studies because I knew when I went to college that it existed. But what was beautiful is that when you're in a Chicano studies class, is you're around other people who are either already like conscious or are being like, their consciousness is being raised. So you feel like alive, you feel at home. And so this is the place where I started to see that you can make a positive impact and not be a wasichu. You can get your education and not be a sellout. It's like how you apply your education. And essentially that's what I bring to my students. Like the notion of success, like we're always taught that success is about acquiring crap, acquiring things, acquiring certificates, acquiring prestige and power. And I'm like, no, like success is what you want it to be. Success is being somebody who contributes positively to the world in whatever way you want to contribute. As long as you are, righteous and you're working honestly, and you're really like conscious of like your community and others, like you can be successful, even if successful means that you desire meditating under a tree for the rest of your life. Whatever it is that makes you happy, that can not negatively impact the world, right? The earth and the people, the community, the greater planet. And unfortunately, like what I see in a lot of my colleagues is that they their whole notion of like even social justice is getting more kids of color to college to fill in roles that have historically been filled by white folks, but not really changing what you're doing once you're in those roles. And I'm like, no, we need to transform the world because we know that the way that the world is operating at this current point is so disgustingly inequitable and so disgustingly destructive. And coronavirus, honestly, is like nature's pushback on everything that we're doing that is just not in line with what nature, with what we need to be doing in this world.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier this concept of tracking. Now, we're being kind of a wide variety of people will be seeing this at some point in time.
Right.
They might not be familiar with that phrase. Can you explain to us what tracking means in the context of high school education?
Tracking is just when students are like identified, usually through like testing or whatever, as having certain qualities, and then they kind of are put into courses, and then they end up like following a track that leads them into certain roles after high school. And so a lot of the testing, that has a really horrific history. It's connected to like eugenics. kind of labels people. And then the really horrific element of that is when the human being themselves start to believe that that's what they are, that label. And so, so a lot of us ethnic studies, Chicano studies, social justice educators were really fighting against that.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little about the history of track, not necessarily tracking, but the inequities of students of Mexican descent, like how we see these inequities exist today, but there's a long history of patterns as to our unequal place in education. Can you give us a little, historicize this a little bit for us, for our audience?
Sure. I mean, that's a very multifaceted, we could be we could write a whole PhD on that, right?
Right.
That's a very multifaceted conversation, but essentially a lot of it goes into philosophies of education in general. And in this country, we have tended to use the factory model, and it's literally the factory model. It was actually based on the Ford assembly line. And so when you look at a factory, there are the owners, right, of it, the owners of the capital. There are the managers, there's the supervisors, and there's the workers, and then there's the quote unquote product, right? And so in that, Mexicans have always been sort of tracked to become the laborers, right? And so so when you come into the educational system, oftentimes it's set up sometimes very intentionally, and other times, just through processes of hegemony. Even, the educators come in thinking that Mexicans are only suitable for certain types of work. And so they're pushed through the educational system to be able to fill those roles outside of high school, to become low wage laborers, right? And so, we social justice educators are pushing against that, but we are also pushing against the factory model in general. We're not about the factory model of education. Education really needs to be something that is transformative, not something that is, reproductive. We do not want to reproduce the society. We know that, factories and this mass production and mass consumption of things, things is not working for this world. It's going to take us on a downward spiral. And so, and of course, we're not okay with tracking our people. Our people need education to, yes, learn, skills, but more importantly, to learn self-love, learn history of self, and to feel inspired to know that we are the change, right? That we are powerful, that we deserve it, that we can do it, and we are. Here we are. Yeah.
So, what I'm understanding you to say is that it's not so much to the goals that our students be taught with the same kind of general human respect that they might teach the Anglo kids with, and train us to be just horrible exploiters of the earth, and
correct,
which we're trained to be anyways. But really to transform our entire concept of what education should look like. So what should education look like?
Well, we should change not just what education should look like, but we should change our position in the world, right? We should change the purpose of education in general. And so, I mean, there are lots of different models of what education should look like, but absolutely one of them should be that, education should be about, praxis, right? We shouldn't just be teaching, certain events in history. We should really be teaching about agency and how students can be a part of creating change. So if we teach, let's say Malcolm X, or, somebody a little bit more quote unquote palatable, right? Martin Luther King, who actually was saying much more than what we give him credit for in terms of our, watered down history. So if we're teaching about the history of Malcolm X, or the history of Martin Luther King, or the history of Cesar Chavez, we shouldn't just be teaching as historical events and these great people, although they were great. We should be teaching about what they were actually doing, actually deconstruct what it is that they were saying, and really teach it as something that's still alive. You can model, you can replicate, you can emulate some of these processes so that you can become the next Malcolm X, the next Martin Luther King, the next, or, you know, who the next Gloria Anzaldúa, you know, whoever it is that you're all these great thinkers and these great philosophers and these great movement folks. So education should really be about that, about teaching to actually go out into the world, not when you graduate from college, but right now. Like, how can you go out into your community and impact change now? Yeah. And so what I would love to see, you know, if it was like a perfect world, like, you know, students will go to school and it wouldn't be so compartmentalized into these little, you know, subjects and these little periods, but it would be a much more interactive, working on larger projects, you know, where students can take a little bit more control of their education. But, you know, I have actually seen, you know, schools that do that. You know, here in Los Angeles, I toured the, you know, Wildwood School, which really does that really well. But, you know, parents pay like $35,000 a year for their kids to go there, right? Like, I want to see that in public schools. I want to see that with our community. I want to see, you know, kids in our community being able to spend part of their school day going out and being able to work with like Proyecto Pastoral, being able to go work with like the East LA Community Corporation, be able to go out and work with like Homeboy Industries and learn, you know, while they're young, like what it is that these organizations, these community-based grassroots organizations are doing to help their community so that they can, you know, will learn it and then they can replicate it. They can be a part of the movement. They can continue it going forward and not just be funneled into what right now, you know, is the traditional, like, you know, either you get with the program and you become an AP student, right? Then, you know, you go off to college. Hopefully you find ethnic studies. Hopefully you find something that's transformative in college. But oftentimes, you know, that doesn't happen. You go to college and then you come back and then you just fit as another little peg in the machine. Or you're tracked into like, you know, the graduation track, you know, go off and go to trade school. Very, very honorable, but not really questioning society. Or, you know, some kids are tracked into, you know, like to be pushed out, right? And then when they're pushed out, like we know they become like laborers who are the most exploited, or, you know, they can go become a part of the, you know, school to prison pipeline, or, you know, just other horrific things, right, that happen. And it's like, no, we need an educational system that doesn't track people to those all like, you know, really just destructive tracks. Like education should really be about like, you know, your consciousness being raised, your love of self, you know, just being heightened, your love of your family. Like we shouldn't be denying who we come from. We shouldn't be denying our parents and being embarrassed of them. We should be embracing them and who they are because, you know, it's where we come from. And then, of course, still be critical because I know, like, I'll just say, like in my own family, there's, you know, there are things in my family that I know, and in my own self that I need to change. You know, I need to be the change I want to see in the world. I need to ensure to teach that to my children. So it's not to just say that, you know, we're like these perfect people. Not at all. Like, you know, but we definitely are worth this change. And we definitely should be a part of this change. And schools should be embracing that and facilitating that. And then, you know, whatever it is that that students love, they should be learning how to do that in a way that's transformative. So not everybody is an artist. Not everybody is a historian. You know, there are kids that are mathematical and want to do engineering, right? Yes, do engineering. Our people need, you know, we need engineers, but we need to know how to become engineers that are not going to be a part of, like, let's say, engineering the gentrification process,
right?
Or continuing the you know, like engineering of how to like frack, or engineering these things that are destructive. We need engineers to go in there with love of self, love of community, love of the earth, to engineer and transform what engineering looks like. Not to just be another person that brings home, like, you know, a pretty penny and then buys a white picket fence, you know, and, you know, like, I don't know, size 26 rims or whatever it is that we are sold as what we need to be successful. Yeah.
You mentioned a series of role models earlier, and it's kind of interesting when we teach about role models. It's kind of, it can be a double-edged sword sometimes because on the one hand, it's very inspiring to see people that you kind of want to be like, right? So look, they embody these qualities and these principles that are just like they speak to you, right? But on the other hand, it becomes this intimidating thing. Like they become like these great men and women on horses who are just like they're like living, they're like statues that they cannot be. I could never be. That's this, right? So how as a teacher do you really drive the point home to your students that like you're the first you, and you can be as great as anyone. Like how do you what are some of the practices and techniques you use to do that?
Well, one of the things is what I kind of spoke about earlier is like to really look at the body of work that some of these role models created, and to do close reads. Like, so what I like to do is I'll read something bigger. And of course, there's all these things going on in students' lives. Sometimes they're in class, sometimes they're not, sometimes they're distracted, whatever. But whatever it is in this bigger piece of reading that I really want to ensure that my students, while I have them, that they get, I'll do like a close read of that, right? Like I'll zoom in to like a paragraph or like a couple of sentences or a page, whatever, and then do a closer read. And so just make sure that students are seeing the essence of that quote unquote role model, right? What are they really saying? What are they really doing? How can we apply that right now? And then also too, like, we don't have to be, like, I don't have to be Che Guevara. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm down for Che Guevara. And, I may leave this earth and not be ever even, well, obviously not Che. Che is like an internationally known icon of the world, the most visual piece of iconography that has ever been seen in the world. So that's a huge exaggeration, but I may die and be forgotten, but that's okay, because it's ego to want to be like the next quote unquote chair, the next, MLK. Like, it's okay. It's I can still make an impact in the world, even if I'm seemingly forgotten, if the things that I do are lasting. Right. And so one of the ways, and I teach this to my children and I teach this to my students, is this notion of like the sacred seven, right? Which is sacred in many traditions internationally, but to the people of this land, the 7 generations before and the 7 generations to come, right? And so like we need to know 7 generations behind us, what they did, the impact of that they left in this world, the impact that we're benefiting or not benefiting from now, regardless if we know even who they are, right? And then the fact that like we have an impact on the next 7 generations. What we do right now has an impact, right? And so like my kids, my own children, my students, just to really get them to understand that. And I've done this also with like parent ethnic studies. I've taught parent ethnic studies, and I've asked them this question, like, do you love your children? Of course they say yes, right? One day when they have children, are you going to love those children, your grandchildren? And they're like, oh my gosh, probably more than I love my children. How would you feel if they did not know your name, right? And like a lot of them are like, oh, that would be awful. Like, my babies, like their babies wouldn't know my name. I'm like, a lot of times when I talk to my students and we start researching our families and we start researching like where we come from, they don't know their grandparents' names. Not all of them, but a lot of them don't know their grandparents, and they definitely don't know their great-grandparents' names. And so we really need to be better about recording and sharing our own family histories, because we're forgetting who we are and where we come from. And that needs to be something that's like, I'm not going to say institutionalized, because it shouldn't be institutionalized, but it needs to become something sacred. And so I know for me in my own family, I want to make sure when I'm gone that there is a system in place to make sure that my kids know to share my story. Not just because I want to be alive still when I'm gone, but because I know I have something important to say. And I know that I come from people that have important things to say. And if we were to listen to those important things, we would have less destruction. We would have less destruction of our earth. We would have less destruction of our relationships with one another, and less destruction of ourselves, right? Less destruction of ourselves. Because I know up until I was like, let's say in my early 30s, I was even self-destructive still. I was still trying to find my way. I need to make sure my stories live on beyond me. Because and I think about like those, and I see that somebody left a message here that knew my father, Antonio Carrasco, right? Like nobody can really truly know who I am without knowing my dad. Like I'm gonna cry here. Oh my God. Like to know who I am, you really need to know the essence of my father, even though he passed away, it's going on 15 years now, right? Because my father was an activist. My father took me to protest. Like we were in New Mexico protesting some of the mistreatment of inmates in the prisons in New Mexico when I was a kid, right? We were, my dad was a avid, like he was a hard, like big time proponent, and he was like a grant writer who worked to get low income health care on the border, the US Mexico border in El Paso and also in New Mexico. My dad was like, now I would call it culturally relevant healthcare, but like that's me being a teacher. I realized like, oh shit, my dad was talking about culturally relevant healthcare, like back then. And so I was around all of that. And so like, you don't know me. My kids, my own children cannot know me unless they know those stories about my dad. And so that's something that we need to keep going forward. That's really what like La Trenza, is really about. It's about that.
Yeah, yeah. And we'll definitely get to La Trenza, but first I want to ask you a question about there's this phrase ethnic studies, and it's coming more and more into the popular consciousness, but as it does that, people who aren't necessarily involved in some of these fights, they don't really know the difference between this phrase ethnic studies and multicultural learning. Can you tell us the difference between ethnic studies and multicultural?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to down talk multicultural education, because I've known some really amazing people. I've had the benefit of knowing some really amazing multicultural educativists, right? Like Dr. Geneva Gay from the UW, and James Banks, also from the UW, Dr. James Banks, and other folks. But essentially, the main differences in, at least in this modern sort of the way that we're sort of distinguishing it, is that ethnic studies is really critical. So we're not really teaching about multiple ethnicities. What we're teaching about is the four racialized, because we know race does not exist, biologically does not exist, it's a social construct. So we call it the four racialized ethnic groups that historically have been marginalized and oppressed in the United States, and specifically in California, when ethnic studies was born 50 years ago. And so, there was the 1968 walkouts where the Chicanos in East Los Angeles, right here down the street from where I live, they were walking out, and they were demanding to have their history taught. And then we have, of course, the Third World Liberation Front, where you've got, Black folks fighting for the same thing. You've got Asian Americans, coining the term Asian American, and also fighting for their histories to be taught. You've got, Native Americans fighting for their history to be taught on their land that belongs to them. And so, Chicanos, Latinos, Chicanos fighting for our history to be taught. And so what distinguishes us now is that we're not just learning about like the foods, heroes, and holidays, but really learning, about like the history, and being very critical, learning about like the history of colonization, learning about the history of oppression, learning about the history of hegemony, like the formation of the quote unquote standard American, and hegemony and the impact. And then also looking at how we can like regenerate, how we can take, our knowledge of our past, our epistemologies, right? Our indigenous epistemologies, our ways of knowing from our ancestors, and then using that in these modern times to create new ways of knowing, ways of thinking, ways of being, to transform our world in a way that is more equitable and just.
Yeah. And so in this vein, there was a group of educators that got together after a state bill had been passed around the question of ethnic studies, to put together a curriculum, and it drew from all the different groups you're talking about. Can you speak a little bit to the development of the ethnic studies curriculum in the state of California?
Sure. So in the state of California, it was AB 2016 was basically originally um, was supposed to get us a graduation requirement throughout the state of California, but eventually, as it got through and got adjusted and altered, it allowed for the creation of a model curriculum. And so the Department of Education, California Department of Education, got three people to become the curriculum writers, and then they got a curriculum advisory committee out of like 100 and I don't know 20 something applications, some really amazing applicants. You know, one of who should have been on the model curriculum but wasn't chosen for whatever reasons. But either way, eventually it was narrowed down to 18 people, and I was one of them. And so we were very diverse regionally, like from north, south, east, and west of California, but also from the 4 racialized ethnic groups. And we also had one white, what they call ally, or one white accomplice, who was on the curriculum with us. And so we were charged with adding to, adjusting what was being written of the model curriculum. And we continuously said, hey, this isn't enough time. We need more time. Like, there are holes in this. You know, we were really good at pushing to make it much more critical, much more complete, but we didn't have enough time. And we were continuously told, like, sorry, the legislation only calls for so much to be invested in it in time and in money. And so, you know, after our 3 meetings, 2 days in February, 2 days in March, 2 days in April last year, we were, you know, sent home as the public. We were no longer part of this, you know, advisory committee. And we got some pushback. Some of it, you know, we agree with. There were, like we said, some holes in the curriculum, and some of it we don't agree with. And the California Department of Education all of a sudden had more funding, you know, and AB 331, which is the new bill that's supposed to make ethnic studies a graduation requirement, was pushed back a full year. And then the AB 2016 was also pushed back a full year. So the model curriculum for the state of California is supposed to be, you know, like stamped and made available by, I believe, March or April of 2021. But we are not a part of that. They have gotten other folks that are not at all ethnic studies scholars, ethnic studies educators to work on it. So we do not, you know, at all think that it's going to be what we originally had intended it to be. Yeah. But, you know, we'll see when that comes. But what we have done, and when I say we, the Model Curriculum Advisory Committee that was brought together by the state, we separately have created our own coalition called the Liberated Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum Coalition. And we are essentially going to take the curriculum in our own hands, and we're collaborating with folks from throughout the state, and even some from out of the state of California that come from the 4 racialized ethnic groups that are all scholars and passionate activist organizers in ethnic studies who are working on the model curriculum. And so we're going to try to kind of follow the same timeline now virtually, because we're unable to physically be together to work on this as we originally had planned. But we're going to try to follow the same timeline and launch it and have it available by March 2021 as well, for free to any educator who wants to use it. And we're using the same sort of philosophy that it is a model curriculum. It's not, we're not saying, if you teach ethnic studies, this is what you should teach. Not at all. Just as, you know, the one for the state was not supposed to be that either. Yeah. It's more, if you want to teach it and you need some help, these are some lessons that we have used that we think are good that you could use. And, you know, these are the guiding principles that we ascribe to, and what we think you should be using when you create curriculum. And yeah, and that's it. Like, that's, you know, it's a model for people to use. And so Liberated Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum Coalition was founded like literally like the week before the schools got shut down. So early March.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the time I've known you, you've never been one to just accept a closed door, an unjustly closed door.
Yeah.
So you I don't know like who I'm really curious the story behind this because I saw just out of nowhere all this hashtag I am ethnic studies. It was this huge
Mm-hmm.
campaign. Can you tell us a little bit about the I
Yeah.
am ethnic studies hashtag
Yeah.
campaign?
Yeah, that actually came from Save California Ethnic Studies, which is another statewide, somewhat related to the Liberated Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum Coalition. So we all came together and we were like, we need to save California ethnic studies. Like they're gonna like jack this up, right? And so we were talking about like having press conferences and just educating folks about it. And the husband of Maria Elena Cruz, professor of Chicano Studies at Cal State Northridge, David, gosh, I don't want to mess up his last name. He's a well-known retired journalist himself, and he was like, most people don't know what ethnic studies is, and so when they hear you, like in a press conference, or they hear you talking about ethnic studies, if you're talking about things like epistemologies and hegemony, like la abuelita, they're not going to know like what it is you're talking about. Like that average person is not going to know. So you need to really talk to them about what ethnic studies is. Like, and he tells us, what is ethnic studies? And we're like, well, it's us. It's about us. We're ethnic studies, Mm-hmm. And then he's like, that's it. He goes, how can anybody say ethnic studies is bad when, your ethnic studies, that woman across the street is ethnic studies, your, abuelita is ethnic studies, your neighbor is ethnic studies, the person who washes your car is ethnic studies. Like we're all ethnic studies. And so if they say they're against ethnic studies, they're saying they're against you, they're against me, they're against the abuelita, they're against, the parents. So that's when we started hashtag I am ethnic studies. And it was beautiful. It was a beautiful movement of people sharing why they are ethnic studies. Like we had a bunch of folks from the Bay Area. A lot of our, Pinay Pinoy brothers and sisters up there were really getting into it. And so I just loved it. It was like very, across like the ethnic, the four racialized ethnic groups, folks were participating. And, my students were excited. I teach a Saturday class at Cal State Long Beach in ethnic studies, and my students were super like excited to post their I am ethnic studies narratives. Yes. So yeah, it was fun. It was really good.
The word epistemology, it's a very important word, but it's not. Mm-hmm. A lot of people use it. I don't even think they even know what they're talking about. Like, but like
I probably don't either. I'm still working on that myself.
But I'm not saying you, but I mean, but generally speaking, I mean, the concept of epistemology is very, very important, and it's a word that certainly not everyday use. Certainly, you're not gonna walk around and talk about it while you're like ordering a cup of coffee or something like that. Epistemology,
right?
But it really defines so much of how we perceive the world. Can you tell our audience, epistemology? What does that mean?
Okay, well, so the very like simple like answer to that is it's just like ways of knowing, right? And so when I think about so before modernization and industrialization and hegemony, right, that was organized around keeping, us developing ourselves as these mass consumers for these mass corporations that were, producing things in mass. Like we had our ways of knowing, right? There was a lot more in line and with what we needed to know in terms of like nature, like keeping balance in ourselves, balance in our communities, and this is like internationally, right? Not just like our people, but like internationally, people had their ways of knowing. And so when I talk about, like indigenous epistemology, I'm talking about like, let's go back to the structures, the ways of knowing, the ways of thinking, the ways of structuring society that our people already knew and had in place before. And of course, there are historical moments where people have veered away from it, and that has caused like, destruction. And so when I teach it, when I think about it as, something that belongs to us that we should embrace anyway. But I also think of it as undoing these new ways of knowing. They're really structured around like capitalism and mass consumption and mass production that we have been like veered towards, right? To love these things to believe that we are these things that they are teaching us that we need in order to be somebody, to be successful, to be happy, to be beautiful, to be good, right? To be American, to be standard, right? And so, modernization, industrialization has taken people internationally away from their original ways of knowing, their original epistemologies, and we need to get back to that. And I say that for like I said, not just for ourselves, but for everybody. Like, even white folks, if they go back to their original ways of knowing, like our world could be in much more balance, right, than it is currently.
Hegemony. What does hegemony mean?
It is so hegemony is like the process of making us believe that the people in power are those that are right, that are righteous, that are beautiful. And so schools have been used as hegemonic tools, right? Like to teach us that founding fathers, right, that they are the smart ones, not ever looking at like what they borrowed from, like, so hegemony is essentially that. It's like it's getting us to think that we should compare ourselves to those who are the elite ruling class in power, in everything from our intelligence, our epistemologies, our ways of just our beauty, our sense of how we look, how we live, how we think. And so we are trying to be counter-hegemonic, to teach that we are not trying to build ourselves in their standard. Mm-hmm. That we do not want to compare ourselves to them, and we do not ascribe to their power systems. Yeah. And that when we choose not to be, getting a piece of the pie, it's not because we are unsuccessful, incapable. It's because we deny it. We do not choose it. Yeah. We choose something that's beautiful and constructive and regenerating, revitalizing.
Beautiful. Yeah. So we began this conversation early talking about some of the different organizations you're a part of. And one of these organizations is the Association of Rasta Educators. Can you tell our audience a little bit about the Association of Rasta Educators and your involvement within it?
Sure. I came to ARE about maybe 5.5 or 6 years ago. Before I was a member of ARE, I knew of ARE, of course, but I really kind of was like a lone teacher, doing ethnic studies, but putting myself in a very vulnerable situation because I didn't really have an organization that kind of backed me up and supported me. I'm going to be very honest with you. The first time I saw an organization that inspired the crap out of me was Chito, Chito in Tucson. I went to, I've been to most of their institutes. I haven't gone in the past year or so, but I'm not going to even lie. Like, I'll tell you right now, Norma Gonzalez, like on one of the first days where they open up Chito, she does, she gets her drum and she does her song, she sings. That right there just blew my mind, because before Chito, I knew ceremonia. I come from a ceremony family. Like, my dad was a sun dancer. My brothers are, all 3 of my brothers are sun dancers. My son is a sun dancer. The mezcalis, like we have, we do sweat lodge. My brother has off and on been a danzante. I've never been a danzante, just busy being a mom and teaching all these other things, but totally love it and believe in it and support. But either way, like, my life as a ceremony woman, spiritual, was always separate from my life as a teacher, right? My life as a teacher was more political, even cultural, but my spiritual element was separated. So when I went to Chito, I was blown away. I was like, this is it. This is freaking amazing, right? I was so inspired, right? Because it was like, I could see the ceremony in the pedagogy. And so that was really super inspiring to me. But I came back to California, and with, Professor Jose Maldonado, Tolteca Cuauhtin, with George Grunauer, eventually with Veronica Valadez, and some other amazing folks, we created Xochitl Los Angeles, which is Chicana organizers, cultivating humanity and indigeneity in teaching and learning. And so we had our annual institutes, and we would invite like Norma Jose Gonzalez and Sean Arce and some other folks to come and do workshops and present. And we did something a little bit different than Chito. You know, Chito has its own, you know, beauty, you know, power, transformation. And so from there, the folks of the Association of Raza Educators started asking for me to kind of join them. And they already had their idea of creating institutes as well, but using the organizing element. So a little bit more on like the praxis side. And so I started helping with that, working with Carolyn Torres and Eric Carbajal, Santiago Andres Garcia, and other folks. My husband eventually joined as well, Raul Cardona. And so I've been with the Association of Raza Educators since, but I'm still proud to be the co-founder of Xochitl Los Angeles, and I will always give props and love and you know, say that Chito was inspiring as all hell.
Yeah. You are also the co-chair. This is a little detour here. You're also the co-chair of the Chicano 50th
yeah.
committee, whatever. So
yeah.
Our audience, because again, this is a wide cross section. People
Yeah.
involved in ethnic studies, and everyone's involved in Chicano movement. So can you tell us a little bit about what the Chicano moratorium was, and what the 50th? And I'm also curious as to what it's up to, but we'll get to that. Yeah.
So okay, so it's a lot. So the Chicano moratorium, right? It was like the largest anti-war or anti-Vietnam War protest in the nation. There were many moratoriums throughout the country, and there were several Chicano moratoriums, but there was the big one that drew a lot of people and was basically confronted with violence by the sheriff's department. That was in August 29th, 1970 at Laguna Park, which is now named Ruben Salazar Park. And so since then, there haven't been consecutive commemorations of the Chicano moratorium, but I was a part of the 45th annual commemoration. I was on the committee that helped organize it, and then I was a co-MC with the late Pablo Aceves, may he rest in peace, who is also a member of Unión del Barrio. And so we co-MC'd it, and then some issues happened, had to step away from that committee. But then, in the past 2 years, a new formed committee of some of the original, folks that organized, like Rosalio Muñoz, and then folks like, Coqui Rodriguez, Jaime Rodriguez, Cecilia Quijano, and Gloria Arellanes is part of our larger general committee. And so, they started drafting their points of unity, and the points of unity are in line with, 50 years ago, like anti-war, anti-imperialism, anti-oppression, pro-workers, anti-environmental racism. But then they wanted to add certain things to it that weren't there before. And one of them is that the power is going to be shared equally with mujeres, and that we're going to be working much more in solidarity with people of color. And so they asked me to be the co-chair, which I was really, I wasn't even alive in 1970. I was born in 1976. My dad did, speak at, I believe it was like the 10th, like in 1980, the 10th annual commemoration. He was a speaker there. Me and one of my brothers were, alive. And so we were small children at the time. But, and it's in me. I believe in it. I'm for it. And for them to ask me to be the co-chair has been really humbling, and I'm just really appreciative of that. And so we've been meeting as a general committee monthly for a year, but we've been meeting as the steering committee for 2 years to organize this large event for August 29th, 2020, which falls on a Saturday. And then, as you know, with the circumstances as they are and wanting to keep our community safe, we are likely going to have a car rally and a virtual sort of rally on August 20th, 2020. And we're going to push all of our plans that we've been working on for August 29th, 2021, which would be on a Sunday. And so the commemoration will still go on, and I think people will forgive us that, you know, we're unable to have it right on the 50th, but we're still organizing. And in fact, I have a core meeting this Saturday, and we will be announcing our general meeting, a virtual general meeting soon, because we've had to postpone them. But yeah, we're still anti-war, we're anti-imperialism, you know, anti-blockade of, you know, Cuba. You know, we're still anti-environmental racism. Biological racism is what we're seeing right now with this, you know, COVID-19 having a greater impact on our Black brothers and sisters, our Native brothers and sisters on the reservations, and our Chicano Latino brothers and sisters. And, you know, so yeah, we're still here with the same message.
Yeah. So definitely. So speaking of the current circumstances, we're locked down. We gotta stay inside. All these things happen. You're there with your family, and within about a week and a half, you create a new project, right? Because that's just how that's how we are, right? So, like, tell us about this new project. Tell us about La Trenza.
So La Trenza was something that my husband and I sort of had envisioned and created since, honestly, before. Okay, but you know, both of our lives are so filled with activities and responsibilities that we were never able to, like, you know, launch it, right? The version that we have of La Trenza right now is a modified version. It originally was meant to be out in the community and bringing other folks in and whatnot. But what we've done is we've modified it to be things that we can do here at home to help families be able to use, you know, some things that are very seemingly simple. And I'm gonna pull up an example here. You know, things like this book here. I don't know if you can see that. I know the river loves me. Yo sé que el río me ama. And, you know, written by Maya Cristina Gonzalez. So, like, seemingly this is just a children's book, you know, but really it's so much more. Like in this case, it's really, you know, like our connection with nature and how it's part of us to protect nature, and that nature will love us if we love it. And if, you know, if we don't, then we know all of these things can happen. But it is also something that you can extend beyond the book. It would take you 10, 12 minutes to read this book, but you can actually do so much more community building, not just with children, but honestly, like even with older family members, that can take you beyond this book. And that's kind of what La Trenza is. It's really taking like a book and pulling out themes, especially themes in line with things like critical race theory or indigenous epistemology, to, you know, in this case as well, like, you know, feminism, feminist theory, cultural intuition, cultural connections, connections with the earth, right? Things that are sacred, and then having conversations with your family. And so, like, for instance, one of the books that we've read and then did like an extra sort of like discussion about was the Subcomandante Marcos book, La Historia de los Colores, the story of colors, right? And so that book, you know, is beautiful. It's artistic, it's creative, right? It's very entertaining, but you can use that as a launching pad to do much more. Like you could talk about, like, you know, banned books. Why would somebody ban a book, right? Why would somebody ban a book written by Subcomandante Marcos? And then we go back to that whole notion of like, what was Subcomandante Marcos actually saying? What were the Zapatistas actually saying, right, that made them controversial? And when you really, really look at it, they're not saying anything violent. They're not saying anything destructive. They're actually talking about, you know, equality, equity, respect for the land, respect for autonomy. And really, quite honestly, like they were really saying, Mexico, follow your own constitution, right? The maize is sacred, you know, like against, you know, like the genetic modification of corn, the monsterization of corn. And so when you start to take one little book, you can go really far beyond and start really having a greater discussion with your family, right? Even like in the other book that we did, Going Down Home with Daddy, was about an African American family that travels down south, right, to their grandma, their great grandma's home, and it's just all those beautiful traditions that they have there, right? Like at home, we could read that book, but then you can literally sit with your kids and say, like, what are the traditions you love? And then like going back to like I was saying before, the 7 generations, my kids will not experience what I experienced as a kid, which was like being on the farm in New Mexico, right? And like by, you know, my dad or my uncles, my grandpa, whatever, killing a goat. I know that sounds bad, but you know, getting a goat and putting it in the ground and cooking it with all the cousins running around everywhere on the farm, jumping on the hay bales, right? Like jumping on the tractors, you know, eating watermelon, just this beautiful family event. And then when the tacos are ready, running to the fire pit with your tortillas and making your little taco, you know, and like the goat head that they would hang by the door. You know, like you walk out and there's like flies everywhere and there's a goat. I mean, those are things that people that know a farm that you'll experience, right? And that's gonna die unless we sit down and talk about it. And so that's what that book, that's why I specifically recorded that book, because it's a simple, beautiful book that actually is much deeper than just the story alone. Like even in the book, the artist put those like heart-shaped sort of symbols throughout the book. And like that heart shape has been commodified, has been, you know, here in the United States and internationally now is like a Valentine's Day, like, you know, kind of sort of symbol. But that is an African symbol that survived and was carved throughout, you know, during, you know, the horrific enslavement of African people. That was like a connection to the motherland. And it's subtle, but the art is in that book. And so there's all these things that we can do with something as simple as like, you know, like a children's book. You know, we can get into like the power of la mujer, the power of like your abuelita, like the, you know, the stories about your connection to corn back home. And then you can start talking about things like, you know, GMO corn, and like here in the United States, the mass production of corn for quote unquote biomass, right? And how we know that biomass is like not actually saving us, it's continuing the destruction of our ecosystem, of our earth, and how if we don't make any changes, like we're going to continue down this path that we're in, you know, and then that change is on us. And when we make those change, it's not that we're being like, if I tell you don't eat caca, what I call flaming hot caca, right? Like flaming hot Cheetos. If I say don't eat flaming hot Cheetos, it's not because I'm trying to deny you that thing that has now become very like part of like our culture here, you know, our modern culture. But like, let's look at the ingredients of flaming hot caca. You know, it's like mass-produced, genetically modified corn. And if you listen to the stories of your abuelitas about the milpas back home and how we used to harvest our corn and keep it in our little silos, and then go even further back and look at like the creation stories of corn and our stories that belong to our people, and how you know this country is seriously disgracing something that is sacred to our people. It's all interconnected, right? So the hard part is to connect the dots all the way along. Oh, I can't hear you.
What message do you have? You know, we're coming up on the hour here, and I really appreciate you taking this time to speak with us. But what message would you have to students, teachers, parents? How do we come together, and how do we come together and really, you know, change the way that this whole thing is being structured?
Well, I would say that that all of us have to work together. That we don't all have to do the same thing. Like all of us are really good and really passionate about things that are different from others, and that we need to work together to, like, you know, we have folks that are passionate about journalism, folks that are passionate about poetry, folks, like I said before, we're all passionate. Some of us are, you know, auto mechanics, like we're passionate about cars. Whatever it is that we're passionate about, like let's do that work in a way that's sustainable. Let's do that in a way that that we are compassionate, that we're giving respect to others, and then, like, you know, we should all try to belong to an organization, join an organization that's doing the work that you believe in, and then all of us as organizations need to work together to create this positive change. for the parents, like I work a lot with parents. I would definitely say that like you're their greatest teacher. You know a lot. You may not have gone to college, but you have so much knowledge to impart, like your children, and it's valuable and it's beautiful and it's actually going to save them. They need to be connected to who they are so that when they go to school, they can take that learning and connect it together. And that what's happening right now in this world is fucked up. This is horrific. How migrants are treated is horrific. How people who are incarcerated is treated is horrific. The privatization of schools, the privatization of healthcare. There's all these things that are horrific, but that we are worth fighting for something better, and that we can come together, and that all the movements are connected. Like, we are not free unless our Black brothers and sisters are free. We're not free unless our Native brothers and sisters, like all of us together, we all need to work together. And none of us is free if we continue the degradation of this earth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lupe. We've been joined this hour by the great Lupe Carrasco Cardona, and it's been a deep honor. I appreciate the Dawes Center for the Arts. Appreciates it. The Dawes Center for the Arts is not for profit that is based in Pomona, California, and we are an art gallery and an art lab and a whole bunch of stuff. Anyways, thank you so much, Lupe. And
you're welcome.
It's been an experience. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been fun. Thank you. See you soon. Okay, bye-bye.